Mr Kerr.
Respecting what you have just said, Deputy Presiding Officer, I would have to say I do agree with other speakers who have suggested that this is a complete waste of this Parliament's time, this debate. Because in all honesty, that's exactly what it is. And we've heard again a speech from Michelle Thompson where she conflates Scotland with the SNP. Surely the SNP members can find a cure for this illness they seem to have contracted together to identify themselves as being Scotland when they are clearly not Scotland. And that conflation really is tired and time spent. The other thing that was said, I thought Martin Whitfield's intervention earlier was very telling as well, because the truth is that this SNP government absolutely has no respect for the concept of devolution. It absolutely is the most centralising government imaginable. Everything they can touch that is locally managed and near to the public gets brought to the centre and then so horrendously mismanaged because of their incompetence. I think the Scottish people can see that very clearly now. And in respect to the time that we're spending debating this nonsense of emotion, we could have been talking about things that are fully devolved. We could have been talking about the health service. We could have talked about education and policing. All these areas where this Parliament plays such a vital role. But the SNP and the Greens, they don't want the scrutiny of this Parliament, a subject I'll come back to. Because one of the things that we could have spent this afternoon talking about is how this Parliament works. And I'm afraid that from the point of view of the Scottish people, for some time now, our Parliament has not been as effective as they expect it to be. And this debate, sadly, is an example of that. We need far more spontaneous debate in this Parliament and in this chamber. And for far too long, we've had a set-up where the whips, the party managers, the parties, they manage the business, they manage the speakers. And frankly, it's the lack of a backbench culture in this Parliament that has led to the kind of straight-jacketed, stilted approach we have to every issue that comes before this chamber. And ultimately, the SNP government will do anything they can to avoid parliamentary scrutiny. It was mentioned earlier in relation to truth-telling that the government falls short in that regard as well. And the excessive, continuous flow of pointless motions squanders precious little parliamentary time that we have, while urgent issues facing Scotland remain unaddressed. I will, out of respect, give way to Christine Graham.
Christine Graham.
I was just going to ask you to be spontaneous and take
Through
some
the
intervention.
Chair, please, Ms Graham.
I beg your pardon. I was going to ask the member to be spontaneous, take some interventions and have lively debate, and not just heckle us and rant at us.
Stephen Kerr. I'm delighted to have been able to fulfil Christine Graham's wishes in an instant. But the SNP, Deputy Presiding Officer, have long run out of ideas for Scotland. They can heckle all they like. They can try and shout me down. I know that's the classic SNP playbook, by the way. When someone says something you don't agree with, just make sure you make as much noise as possible. Because, frankly, they operate by the playbook, the Nicola Sturgeon playbook, now the Humza Yousaf playbook, same book, different face on the cover, by creating as much distraction through the manufacture of grievance as they can. And it's very hard for me to disagree with the member for Inverness and Nairn when he said last week that it is increasingly apparent that the SNP government is not interested in putting Scotland's interests first. But clearly, as always, they are interested in putting the SNP's interest first. And that's why the Secretary of State for Scotland was absolutely right on Sunday when he said that Scotland's two governments should work together for the benefit of the people of Scotland, because that is a common-sense position supported by the people of Scotland, and that is the position of the Scottish Conservatives. But for the SNP and the Scottish Greens to parade themselves as the protectors and defenders of devolution is laughable. Anyone with even a passing knowledge of Scotland's political history in the last few decades know the SNP were implacably opposed to devolution. They exist to destroy devolution, and they scrape together any excuse they can, Deputy Presiding Officer, to undermine and devalue devolution. I'll give way one more time, if I might.
To Alistair Allen.
I thank the member for giving way. I'm interested in his view of history. Will he not confirm that the SNP campaigned for there to be a Scottish Parliament? And contrary to what he's just insinuated just now, his party actually campaigned for there not to be one.
Stephen Kerr.
Dr Allen's whole party exists to destroy the devolution settlement. And so they take every opportunity they can to find any grievance they can to throw into the works and to make sure that devolution is as hard as possible to operate by the government of the United Kingdom and the government of Scotland. The truth is, and it was mentioned earlier, there are regular and good working relationships between Scottish ministers and UK ministers, and good working relationships between UK civil servants and UK civil servants based in Edinburgh. So that's another myth that the SNP wish to perpetuate, which is absolutely erroneous. No, the SNP seek to destroy this Parliament. And the evidence of that is through the way that they conduct themselves. This is the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world. And guess what? It was the Conservative Party in government which oversaw the devolution of more powers to the Scottish Parliament during the past decade. And the reality of that can be seen by the fact that we now have 29 Scottish ministers, many more than ever before. And when challenged for the reason for this expansion in the number of Scottish ministers, the SNP say it's because they have an expanded range of ministerial responsibilities and powers. And guess where they came from? They came from a Conservative government at Westminster. So I don't think I will be taking any lectures from the SNP about the undermining of this Parliament by the UK government, particularly from an SNP Scottish Green government, when it's the Conservatives that have made this Parliament the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world. And that's why, presiding officer, yes, I accept what Dr Allen said. I was against devolution. I did vote against devolution. But you know what I've got now, Dr Allen? I have got the zeal of the convert. I believe in devolution, but I believe in the devolution that reaches every town and every village and every part of Scotland where people feel that they're involved in making decisions for the future of themselves, their families and their communities. So I will wind up, because I'm being encouraged to wind up. There are many other things I'd like to have said, particularly about UKIMA, but I won't be able to get those in. But I do think, if I may conclude by saying, thank you. I will take the invitation. This has been an opportunity to conclude. I will say this, that the Scottish Parliament needs to have a good look at itself. We, the members of the Scottish Parliament, should have a good look at ourselves. Ask ourselves why the legislation that we send from this place into the statute book is often regarded, and quite rightly so, as unworkable, unenforceable and broken before it even leaves here. And finally, in terms of the powers of scrutiny, what powers of scrutiny? We should be asking ourselves about the structures, the processes of this Parliament and making improvements so that this place is worthy of the good people of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr.